So welcome to you all, and welcome to Hannah Fleming-Hill, who amongst many other gifts is a digital missioner who works for Southwest Baptist Association and also East Midlands Baptist Association, but I know has engaged with a number of different churches from a number of streams of church, not just Baptist churches, over this last year particularly. I'm going to highlight Hannah and then ask Hannah to share with us about this incredibly interesting and important new area of ministry that's opened up to us, hybrid church. So Hannah, over to you.
Right, can you all see the presentation okay? Super. I can definitely tell you to start with that I won't be answering every question, because I will just say up front, I don't know everything about digital and hybrid church. I'm just very, very passionate about it. As Carl said, my name is Hannah. I'm a digital missioner and creative content strategist. If you're online, you can find me at those two handles. That's my personal and my work one. It would be great if you're able to share sort of either Facebook or Twitter or Instagram handles of either yourself or your church, because I think it's a great way for us to be to support each other and connect with each other as churches online. So to go back, and that is the last GIF I'll use. I just like using those two at the beginning because I think this one here just summarizes a bit about communications from a biblical perspective. So we're in the biggest communication shift in 500 years since the printing press. There's never been such a kind of seismic jump in how we communicate with each other. We've gone from paper to platform, from script to screen, and from scribe to selfie. And that transition is absolutely fine. That's how we've adapted to life. Our culture's changed, the way that we communicate has changed as well. And so tonight we're going to look at hybrid church, but it is just ideas and suggestions and thoughts that I have. But whilst you feel free to take them on board, this then is not the only way. It is very much about how you explore it yourself. I'm going to use hopefully fairly open terminology and language that everyone will understand. However, for thinking about hybrid, I think it's really important that terminology, both in how we communicate it internally within church teams, but also publicly to everyone, whether that's congregation or just community who are not engaged in your church, is how you identify how you're communicating. So whether that's online, be it website, social media, emails, WhatsApp, or on site, which I think is a really important word that we use, on site rather than in person, because for many, as we've all experienced this year, we can still be in person, we can still communicate, it is still a person behind the screen, it's just on site, whether that is on site at the church or on site at a cafe, at a club, it doesn't matter where it is, it's just in the building is sort of the better word for it. So when I say on site, I mean meeting where we could physically touch each other, well, not with COVID at the moment, but sort of online and on site. So I'll just give you kind of a few seconds. I mean, we don't need to answer this, but if you have had, if you do feel that you're able to, please do put it in the chat, because again, it's really great for us to all share. So what were your main ministries pre-lockdown? What were the things that your church really excelled in, really was passionate about, and was really involved in? And how did that change over lockdown? What happened, or what challenges did you face that meant you couldn't do that anymore? Or could you still do it? Did it change? How did it change over lockdown? So that's not looking forward, that's just at the moment, so up until now. So what is hybrid church? I think I spelled competition wrong there, actually. It's not a competition of either or, but a combination of both, bringing about a new style of church. And as Pete Phillips says, it's, who I'll mention at the end, it's a church without walls. So it's both online and on site. It's activities that happen and engage with people online, but also allows for fellowship and community in person, on site, but as well as being in person online. It's not exclusive, but inclusive. It's about taking down the walls to engage with anyone and everyone. It's about us going to where people are rather than simply demanding that they join in and come into our building. It's reaching the margins, the isolated, the abandoned, the lonely, the busy, the sick, the housebound, or the out too much. It's about adapting to how we live now, how we live life, but also how we, the challenges that we face personally. So maybe people don't work Monday to Friday 9 to 5, they work over weekends, they work night shift, they've got family, they have family commitments, it's just too far to connect with a church, that's too far for them to travel with a church that they connect with. It is a seesaw of mission, ministry and church, sometimes maybe one more than the other, but it's all part of the same machine. Of evangelism, discipleship, that doesn't make sense, the well-versed and the new. And to be honest, it's going to be messy, especially as we come out of lockdown and we come out into this kind of new possibility and new potential of what we might be able to do. It's not going to be perfect, and hybrid isn't a one model fits all, and this is exactly how you do it. It's what works best for you. It's constantly evolving. So why do we need to do this? So for me, Esther 4:14 has been a huge verse that I keep kind of feel is echoing over this last year. For such a time of this, can you imagine what lockdown would have been like if we'd have had this 15 years ago, and we wouldn't be able to video call, live stream, or even just communicate with friends and families the other side of the world at such ease that we do have now. In Mark 2:22, Jesus says, new wine needs new wineskins. So with this new potential, new opportunity that the future brings us, does church need to evolve and adapt to fit that? In Ephesians 4:11, I won't read the whole of the verse, but it talks about different people, different roles, and all of them addressing different needs that people have. And again, the body of Christ, that's made up of lots of different parts, and that is what church needs to be, addressing the different parts of people's needs. And again, where two or three are gathered, there are arguments that say that online can't, you can't be spiritually connected with someone. God's not online. Actually, I would argue he very much is. He's everywhere. And I think where two or three are gathered, whether that's 5 people on a Zoom, however many we've got here tonight, God can still be present and is present. So I think if, as I say, if we've realized that COVID can change everything, and that we wouldn't have been able to do it if digital wasn't around like it is now. COVID's shown us that church isn't just about the Sunday service. The church has continued to witness to the mission of God despite the buildings being closed. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, that the church isn't just a building, it's a group of people. And there's been so many things that groups, whether that is individuals or as churches, volunteers, charities, businesses, they've done to still show God's love to people without needing to physically be in a building. Church attendance was going down again, that, no matter what denomination you're a part of, and across the world, it's been noted over kind of the last several decades that church attendance has gone down. And for whatever reason that might be, perhaps a kind of personally, I think clinging on to past traditions of doing church. So again, just about the Sunday service, it doesn't fit within our culture. But COVID's changed that, and there's numerous amounts of research. A lot of it is in America, so I try not to use that too much. But there's some reports from the UK that active participation in church and faith, so maybe that's not necessarily joining a church, but spectating or praying or listening to something, has increased from 7%, which was how people classify 7% of the UK population prior to lockdown, identified as Christian or as practicing in faith, whereas now over lockdown it's gone up to 25%. I think that's a hugely encouraging thing that we should take on board, not just as a short-term statistic, but something that we should actively try to maintain and build the momentum on. Does on-site favour an exclusive attitude? Again, as I said, that if we've got a behaviour of it has to be at this time, at this place, and you have to come, and we can't fit around you, actually, does that mean that people won't engage? People don't want to come along because they've got children or they've got commitments, or actually it's the one day off that they have as the family together. And especially, I think, for lockdown, it's showed that actually it's favoured able bodies and those who are more traditionally routined. COVID has levelled a playing field of sorts for no one to have access to the building. Everyone has to engage with it online. For those that may have been excluded in the past, are welcoming us who are physically able to go to places, to join them in a new expression of church and building community for Christ in different ways. But I will also add to that actually, because of lockdown, there are also, it's kind of not leveled a playing field of those who are experiencing digital poverty or digital inexperience and not being able to connect on that way. And I'm all for digital and online. I do love it, obviously, but we are human. We still crave community, contact and relationships. We still want to be with people on site. I might be able to connect with my friends and have regular contact and conversations with them online, but there's nothing like meeting my house group and being able to be with them and hug them when we can, but actually be together in the room. The fellowship is a huge part of faith, but also it's not the only part. There is so many aspects to it, but it is a part of us growing as Christians. So to give you another few moments to think about, if we look back to both before lockdown and during, what can be let go? What things, what projects, what ministries were you doing that maybe haven't worked so well? What are things that just don't fit in with who you are as a church now? Going forward, will that work in the same way? Think about what resources do you have, and that's not just money, but it's people. So who do you have within your church, within your community, within leadership, within those who aren't engaged actively with various of the different types of ministries within a church? Who isn't involved in something that you could tap into their knowledge and expertise and just willingness to serve? What places do you have? So whilst we obviously want to get back into the building, how could you use the buildings in new ways? How could you use the church from Monday to Saturday in a different way you weren't doing before? And what passions do you have? Who are you as a church passionate about? Who are you as an individual? What are you as an individual passionate about? What resources can you channel into those things? So how do we do this? So that is a picture of me in my day job at my church, doing food parcels for children and families that were experiencing holiday hunger. But if we think about the last 15 months and what people have done, whether that is, not even churches, but as individuals, communities, there's been so much more of a awareness for the lack of basic provision for so many people within this country. So food banks and sort of pop-up places where people can support with food, resources for school, clothing, school uniform. There's been so much more of an awareness of how people can support. It's been a lot more phone calls, emails, letters, because people are trying to connect with people in different and new ways. Clapping for the NHS. How many people realised that they were talking to their neighbours and people on their street for the first time, where they hadn't done that before until we were clapping for the NHS? And we were going out physically, or we were going out onto the streets and taking a moment as a neighbourhood, as a street, as a community. And how many amazing things came out of that? Activities for neighbourhood, so for your neighbourhood. So there's so many different stories that I could share, but there is one that happened, we'd been last Christmas, of an angel tour, and that as the church, I think they'd made lots of angels and they put it around different places within the community, and that was both I think as statue, I think it was actually big statues that people could engage with as photos. But then the running club realized that they could do a kind of set a Strava route or something like that. And actually they were encouraging people to go around and do something that engaged with something that the church was doing, but also engage people as community doing something that they may not have done together. Geotagging and various things like that, and I've written scavenger hunts, so things of people going, you know, how many things can you spot locally, what pictures can you see in people's windows, and actually encouraging people to get out into their community, share pictures, and just sort of feel a sense of connection within their neighbourhood. Photo submissions, again, I mean, you know, there's so many things of people being able to share their perspective of lockdown, things that they've either been encouraged by, been challenged by, things that have been able to connect people and build a kind of a story of what people are going through. Post-service coffee on Zoom with people you don't know. How many times have you been put into a breakout room with someone you wouldn't normally chat to after church on a Sunday, but actually it's just a new way of getting, so if you're being forced into a room with someone, but how many new relationships has that come through because of that? Online prayer as well, how many more people have been able to engage because of online prayer? They're not restricted to time, bus routes, or weather conditions, or actually they don't really like going out in the evenings for health reasons or kids' commitments. How many people have been able to get engaged in that? And there's countless stories of people, so church leaders or Christian personalities, that's probably not the right word for it, who have they've been online before and that was great, and then they do a live stream, very casual but very intimate, of just, I'm walking the dog, how can I pray for you, here's a reading today, and they have like significantly skyrocketed their engagement and people just wanting to connect and say, I need prayer, please pray for this, or really found this encouraging. So what different things can we take from this into the future? How can we carry on certain things and build momentum? I know this is, I'm sure everyone has got, you know, 10 times these amounts of stories and just things that we wouldn't assume to be part of a kind of hybrid model and involvement, but actually just really enrich the church experience. So to kind of, when you're thinking about it, it's sort of putting together a bit of a strategy. And I said this earlier in the meeting today, that I feel sometimes strategy said in a church perspective is seen as a bit of a dirty word and that you don't like thinking about it. But as we go into this new possibility, this new world, that a strategy does need to come into place. So you need to think about, who are you as a church? What are your ministry focuses? Where are you? You know, location is a huge thing. I'm in the middle of Plymouth city centre, so I can think very urban activities and, you know, things that engage lots of different people of different ages. If you're in the middle of Dartmoor or, you know, in a very rural area, your activities and opportunities will be very different to mine. Who is your audience? Who are you trying to reach? And think about, again, you know, what are the types of ages and demographics? You don't really want to be thinking about lots of students and young people if you're in a very rural area where there's no university nearby, and as soon as young people turn 18, they kind of leave straight away. Who have you got in your community that you can try to reach? Platforms and place. So where will you be? So that is both on site, so will you be in the building? Will you go out and do more sort of activities in other places, local cafes or community centres? but also in terms of platforms. What social media platforms and digital platforms will you be on? Do you make a decision to just be on Facebook and Instagram, but you will be on WhatsApp and you will do Zoom? Or will it be because you're going for a younger audience or younger demographic to connect with, you want to go on TikTok instead? Your message, how will you communicate? So obviously thinking about who you are and your audience and what platforms, that influences that. And how does your audience journey move? So as digital church and online gives us a peek and perspective into church. You need to show diversity and activity and introduce your church. It's the front window of your church. Give them a peek of who you are. Don't give them a peek, give them the wide open doors into who you are. Live streaming is great, but most of the time it's simply I can't speak today. It's simply for spectating. How do people go from viewing you online to being more engaged, being active within your church and your community? How do you take them from online to on-site, but also vice versa, from on-site to online? How do you keep that connection throughout the week? So getting them into church on a Sunday, they're already there and they're willing to do that, but how do you get them to be connecting with you throughout the week, keeping in contact and building that relationship? Authenticity is a huge part, I think, for people online. We're so aware that everything's faked and can be so stylized and set up. Authenticity is a hugely valuable asset for us to be sharing. One of the reasons why people so much enjoyed services at the beginning of lockdowns, because people were doing it from their living rooms, not just the pulpits. They were doing it in their homes and opening up kind of a little bit of who they are. And what are your goals and what are your markers for success? So actually, what do you want to see? Is it that you'd like to really see an increase in your youth and families work, and how many people that you're engaging and having, just being connected with? How many people that you're having actually, whilst attending church is great, but that's not the only thing, but actually you just want to see a bit more of people coming into church in person. And conversions, whilst again not a great word to use, actually it's in both senses of how many people can we bring to Christ? How many people can we see their lives changed? So that not just as well from spectators or anonymous viewers, but to engaged and involved. So conversions is also kind of a analytical term of actually how do you see people turning into kind of customers, whilst again not the right word, but how do you see them going to actually being part of this journey? So this is probably not going to be very easy to view, but it's a church discipleship pathway. So I would highly recommend reading into it more. It only came out kind of a few weeks ago by a guy called Dave Adamson, who's brackets also known as Aussie Dave. I mentioned him again at the end. But he's done this sort of pathway model, and of just showing actually how it all interlinks, how you can go from kind of, he calls it physical, but physical entry, digital entry. I think it'll be kind of, it's things like this that are really interesting to see how the things can interlink. So I put together a few ideas of just thinking about kind of going from on-site to online, but also in hand. So actually, how can things change? How could things be both physical, well, in my hand, but also could these be accessible online? But it's sort of just more a kind of a couple of different ideas. So for on-site, you've obviously got Sunday service, after service, coffee time, prayer meetings, Bible studies, coffee mornings, breakfast groups, but also local support. So actually thinking regardless of church, but how are we engaging locally in our community? So again, food banks, toddler groups, that again, that's part of that, because actually social isolation and relational poverty are huge challenges that many people face, and they want to just meet in person. But then online, so live streaming, but also linking in with other online ministries. So you need online welcomers, you need people to connect with those who are spectating online. Live streaming of other activities, but actually not just having to live stream it, but online gatherings of other activities, so prayer, fellowship, communion, with intentional engagement. So are you getting people, asking people to get involved? Then kind of throughout the rest of the week, you could have live streams or pre-recorded videos of summaries of the sermons where people can ask more questions, or just to sort of, if you're limited on time, just to expand a bit more. Bible studies, Zoom groups, WhatsApp, phone calls, and again, in hand, you've got postcards, letters, phone calls. But for those who are not necessarily online, individual Bible studies, so resources that people can do without needing to be online. Could you share books? So we've got a book swap cupboard on the grounds for my church, and it's a way to connect with those, feeling connected to the church without having to kind of physically on site come and do it. But also printed newsletters. So I mean, it's not this is not the sort of final list, but literally I just put a few ideas together of thinking about actually how does something go from kind of Sunday service to being online, and actually how that all again interlinks. So things to think about, and again, this is not these are considerations, it's not kind of one way or the other. So actually, how does this work missionally? It needs to be more than just one group of people in different means. So it's not just, here's my congregation, and yes, we're in person, but then we also do this and we do this, and it's the same group of people getting receiving that. Actually, how are you interlinking and connecting with different people in different ways? So membership, is already a complicated issue, but actually does online give a new opportunity? Does digital give it a new way that we could identify people that allow them to still give and pray and be involved with the church? Think again about your members' journey. So actually, how do they go from viewing your Facebook Live streams of the Sunday service to starting to comment on it to getting involved? How do they go from spectating to engagement, and who's responsible for moving them along into it, integrated within the church? So again, that's where I mean about online welcomers. Actually, are there online pastors who connect specifically with people to kind of bring them to the on-site and create for the platform? So thinking about how people access things, and does it translate? So an hour service wouldn't necessarily work for online. Can you shorten things down that are specifically for online and for those viewing via a screen? And how is it presented? So I'm presenting to you all here, though you probably can't see me so big. I'm sort of looking at the screen and I'm addressing people who I can see a few of your faces, but I can't get a full response if I was in the room. Whereas if we were all in a room together, I'd be looking around and trying to engage a lot more eye contact. And if I was doing that and then not looking at the screen or at my camera, actually there's a lack of or there's a kind of disconnect with connecting. So actually, how are you engaging with online? And again, terminology, hi to you online. Actually, no, thank you for joining us. They are joining you, just in a different way. Be creative, be authentic, be vulnerable, open up that we're not trying to do everything. We're not trying to be the BBC or Netflix trying to produce fancy documentaries or videos. Actually, this is who we are, and this is we're owning sort of our little space of church. So it needs to be the whole church, not just a few in leadership. It is this needs to be led by leadership, but actually it needs to involve the whole church. New ministry opportunities, again, online welcomers, prayers, isolation companions. So is there someone who physically can't go out and about? Maybe they're not that technologically or digitally engaged, but actually they've got time. They can sit and call people and just connect and spend 20 minutes just chatting to those on the phone. Get everyone involved. And again, just because it's digital and online doesn't mean it's all just young people. That anyone might want to get involved, and they might have a heart and a skill for it. thinking about digital poverty, digital apprehension, and digital native. So how are different people able to connect online? So digital poverty, actually, is that something that as a church and a community you can engage with, which might lead to from engaging with digital poverty and school kids, to not having resources, that you could then connect with them by inviting them to youth groups, and then you engage with the whole family. Digital apprehension, thinking, you know, actually just doing a few Zoom sessions and just being able to connect with them and just answer questions in a very easy open space, rather than it need, you know, a whizzy slideshow, actually just allowing people to ask the questions. So resources, what are you giving people? So again, that's kind of in-hand stuff of actually how are people able to find out more about faith, about what the church is, and sort of the capital C church, who you as a church are. Actually, how can I, you know, what things are you giving me to learn throughout the week, so that when I come to church on a Sunday, I'm feeling invigorated and engaged to learn, because I've had that kind of that other experience of faith throughout the week. How you're capturing new people, not in a kind of net catchy sense, but you know, actually how are you being able to engage? So if you have new visitors coming on site, how do you stay connected with them? Could you get emails or telephone numbers? Again, you know, understanding that not everyone wants to be connected in those ways. Could you invite them to online Facebook groups to find out more, or forums, if your church has those features? So actually, how are you being able to, again, go the vice versa of connecting with those who come on site to online, and then how do you go to invite them the other way? So what new ministries came about through lockdown? So what new things have you started, and what does their future look like? How can you continue them? Will you continue them? Maybe there's some things that you said, you know, we've done 12 months of this and it was right for us then and there, but actually this is not something that fits, or wow, we've been blown away with how this has worked and we really want to carry it on. So for me personally, in my day job, we support church in doing combating holiday hunger, and we've had so many churches have said, you know, we started this throughout lockdown and we want to carry on because the relationships it's built has just shown to be so fruitful, of people understanding that the church cares, and we want to carry that on. Okay, it's not going to be exactly how we were doing it in lockdown, but how can we take this kind of formula of connecting with families in need to grow a relationship with them, so that they want to grow a relationship with God. So a couple of people I've mentioned already, who I would highly recommend kind of finding out more about, because they are the sort of geniuses in hybrid and in this sort of area. So definitely Pete Phillips. He's written, and I can show them again in a minute, he's written a book called Missio Dei, and he speaks all the time about digital church, hybrid church. He's also written hybrid church, blending online and offline community, and various other things, but it's very influential in thought leader within digital and hybrid church. Heidi Campbell's written a book that's just come out, Revisiting the Distance Church. There's a lady called Laura Neal who has health conditions that means she can't go out and be as active, but she is incredibly active online. Again, the same for Tanya Marlowe, both of them have prior to lockdown were raising the awareness that actually online is a way for many people who can't be active and join in physically with church. Dr. Bex Lewis, who unfortunately has now passed away, but up until kind of the beginning of the year, she was incredibly sort of at the forefront, just incredibly moving, and was at the forefront of digital and online, and how church can be just a part of that. And then Carrie Newhoff is American pastor and sort of leadership speaker, and Aussie Dave Adamson, who did the pathways that I showed earlier. all of these people are incredible, and I would highly recommend, and actually I've just realized as well, if you don't have it already, Mark Crosby's So Can Everyone Hear is again another book, less as much on hybrid, but it's sort of communicating church in a digital age is what it says on the front. So that's kind of me wrapping up now, but my kind of final thoughts are the method and the means may have changed, how we're communicating may have changed, but the message still stays the same. It's not about specifically using digital for live streaming, but to use any and all resources available to share the gospel, show God's love, create disciples, and build the kingdom of God. And I hope this has been helpful in sharing a few ideas, and just sort of starting to spark interest and thoughts for the future. And I'm going to stop, if I can find it, stop sharing. And any questions?
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was brilliant. As always, thank you for opening up this subject to us and for sparking various thoughts in our minds. So guys, I'm going to ask for you to use your digital raise hand button if that's at all possible. And that's found in the reactions tab, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click reactions, and then there's a key that says raise hand. If you do that, then it will appear on my participants list and I can introduce you. And then you can come off mute, ask your question. And then if you can go back on mute once you've asked your question, that would be really helpful. So we've got some people that are getting in quick, but since I'm in my privileged position, I'm gonna sneak a question just to get us started, if that's all right, whilst people are thinking and want to maybe delve a bit deeper into some of the things that you've mentioned already, Hannah. I know that a couple of the churches that we serve have kind of changed a little bit their tack over the last 12 months from the platforms that they use. And I wonder whether you might want to comment on this. I suspect you might start to talk about what's your audience, but certainly a number of them started off using things like YouTube. So they streamed a service to YouTube, occasionally using Facebook Live, but YouTube is a biggie, but have then decided to knock that on the head in favor of Zoom. And various different reasons that they have done that, but primarily because the community aspect of Zoom seemed to work better for them than just streaming to YouTube. Equally, I do know some that have done the opposite. So they started on Zoom, but now they've gone to YouTube in streaming as they've gone back slowly into their building. Have you got any thoughts about platforms and kind of the advantages or disadvantages of the different platforms?
Well, as you predicted, it's audience to begin with. I completely agree with kind of thinking that Facebook and YouTube are different. So we stream directly onto YouTube at the moment because generally most people can access YouTube. You don't need an account to watch it or engage, whereas Facebook you can, but it's a bit clunky, it's a bit harder to navigate around if you don't have an account. Again, whilst they have pros and cons, I think actually doing it compared to Zoom, so YouTube to Zoom, very different in the purpose and what you can do in it. So I don't think always that sound is as good on Zoom. So obviously we wouldn't want to all unmute and then start singing. But actually the sort of I'm trying to think of the word, the fluidity that can happen on YouTube because you're preparing it or pre-recorded it or something, that's a good thing for that. I think there is an intimacy and an allowance for conversation and community because you can see me and I can see you. So whilst people are commenting on here, you can have a chat on YouTube, but I can see faces. I can hopefully see people smiling and nodding and agreeing or disagreeing or even worshipping. I can feel that and I can see that, but I can't see that on YouTube. So I think it's different. However, YouTube you can open up to everyone, whereas Zoom, whilst Zoom bombing's gone kind of like down in a concern, I think actually it's people don't feel as comfortable to open up all Zoom details to the public. So yeah, I think it's kind of different.
That's helpful, thank you. And there's been some great chat in the chat box whilst you've been presenting. Don't read it now, read it later. But please do keep putting comments. Derek, thank you, really helpful comment. We've been using Zoom, which simultaneously live streams to YouTube, and then we upload shortened podcasts to Facebook. That sounds fantastic, and very much thinking about various audiences engaging with that Derek's just done there. Chris is saying YouTube's good to view, but Zoom and Facebook has some better interaction. Jonathan's talking about YouTube is the one that they've gone for, as many of the members didn't want to use Zoom. I think that's something I've heard of as well, particularly people on high-techy people in your church. Then being able to look at YouTube seems a little bit easier and straightforward than Zoom very often. That's a very good point. Right, let me introduce Roslyn. Roslyn from Redditch Baptist Church, who's got a question. Please keep putting hands up, raising hands, guys. There's more of you out there that have got questions or comments to make, so please do raise hands. But over to you, Roslyn.
Thank you, Carl. It's just a very quick one, really, to ask, as we're being recorded, how will our other deacons be able to access this recording if they're interested later?
Well, that is a great question to ask, and you've invited my shameless plug for our YouTube channel. So there you go in the chat box. If you click on that link, it'll open the URL. Hit subscribe, and then as you go back onto YouTube, then you'll see. So this session will be available by the end of the weekend. If you give me a couple of days to edit it down a little bit, neaten it up, and then upload it. But it'll be available on our YouTube channel by the end of the weekend if you want to share it with others. Brilliant.
That's great, thank you.
No problem. Other questions and comments? Don't be shy. The question here from Mark Thomas. I don't know, Hannah, whether you want to answer this one or not. Didn't realise it was possible to use Zoom simultaneously streaming to YouTube. Do you know how to do that?
Unmuted. Well, Derek's answered it already. Yeah, it's OBS. I think I haven't personally done it, but I've seen it being done. And again, there's various platforms, OBS, StreamYard, and things like that, that allow you to kind of link platforms to that in.
So OBS is a free piece of software, Mark, that you can download. StreamYard and others are not so free, but are useful broadcasting tools to multiple platforms. In fact, if you just want to stream Zoom to YouTube, that can happen automatically. If you've got a basic subscription service, then you can do that straight away. You need to go into back end of Zoom in order to make that happen. So it won't be on your Zoom app that you'll be able to do it. You have to log into Zoom on your browser, and then you connect the Zoom meeting to YouTube, and it generates a URL for YouTube, which you can then share with people. And so using third-party software like OBS means you can then broadcast to multiple channels and multiple platforms all at the same time. But if it's literally just Zoom to YouTube, then you can do that directly. That's the function of Zoom. Someone came up, but hand in the air, I think it's Alistair, and then it's disappeared again. Were you about to say what I've just said, Alistair? I can't remember what you... Other thoughts and other questions, please do keep coming, guys. You can write in the chat box if you want to, or do raise a hand. Let me just ask another question, because I noticed that further up the chat there were some people who were asking about membership. You mentioned membership in your presentation, Hannah, and obviously it's a little bit loaded this. So depending on your church background, those of us that are within a Baptist tradition see membership possibly as slightly different in some ways to those that may be from Anglican or Methodist backgrounds or from others. This clearly is presenting some issues to us, and just to illustrate that, I have churches that I'm serving at the moment, some of whom are saying that it's simply not possible to be a member unless you are able to be on site, physically present together. Equally, I've got other churches who I'm serving at the moment that are trying to figure out how to help those who found faith in the northeast of England, given that we're in the southwest, become members of their church, possibly even find ways for them to be baptized, and then become part of the church, even though they live in the northeast of the country and the church is based in the southwest. Do you have any thoughts on that one? Good. I thought that might stimulate a few comments. Have a look, go first, Hannah, and then I'm going to introduce some others who've got some questions.
Well, it's a tricky one, especially because I'm not technically officially a Baptist, though.
None of us really are, but we just hang around together.
Yeah.
On,
it's a really tricky one, and I for me, I think it's about where people's hearts are at, and how they do want to, and yeah, or how they want to and how they do engage with your church. And I think, you know, in a way that shouldn't be prohibited to if they live more than, you know, 20 miles, 5 miles down the road. I think it's almost how do we define it, and I think there was a comment in it of saying actually since the nature of church or behaviour of church has changed, actually how we identify members should change. I think that's what it said. But I for me, I think it's how do we who are we including in the family? And for me, I don't think just because you are only engaging online, I don't really care where you are. If you feel a part of us, that's all I want to know.
That's very helpful, Hannah. It may or may not be on that subject, but I'm going to introduce Patrick. Patrick, do you want to come off mute and ask a question and make a point?
It's a very simple question, but if you've got some sort of hybrid and you've got people on Zoom and some people on site, have you any advice for how you can enable as much interaction as possible for the people on Zoom? Because, you know, you can sort of shove a computer at the back of the service and ignore them, you know, but and we thought we'd probably have a greeter, you know, designated greeter to start off with, but any further thoughts on that?
I think the first thing, yeah, is having that online online welcomer, online kind of connector. I mean, when we've done the webinars, I'm speaking, but Carl's the one who's kind of monitoring the chat and putting in links and stuff. So slightly being prepared beforehand as a speaker, as a like the welcomer, of having resources that actually, if you want to share the slides on there, it could also be a thing. An opportunity of saying to those who join online, right, join us at 10:15, and you know, if you're here, we're just going to chat, and actually you're allowing that car park, we're all just coming in conversation that they're not having online. And granted, they're probably either only talking to themselves or the welcomer, but actually if the welcomer's changing, or actually they then feel like their community because they're then in a room together and actually able to talk rather than just attending and then they don't get to say anything and that's it. But as well, yeah, being prepared and having kind of links or questions. Actually, if the welcomer's got the sermon or kind of key questions that could be asked, actually, could they sit there? Obviously, they can't really say anything during the service, but could they be messaging? And, you know, probably a good to have a fast typer of saying, you know, how do you feel encouraged by this? What challenges you on this? Or what else did you find in this verse? And actually asking people to engage, rather, we don't, you know, I don't know, it's a very British thing, we don't really like to be particularly vocal during a sermon. Actually, how can we get people to be vocal online?
That's helpful. Yeah, that does, Hannah. Thank you very much. And Derek's put a question in about anyone got experience of online pastoral role, like an online pastor. I think that ties in with what you've just been saying. Certainly, that's a role that I've played in the church that I'm a part of. Over the lockdown period, at first every Sunday for quite a number of months, And yeah, there is a role, I think, definitely there, almost potentially a new ministry role for those who can engage with people in that online world, but also kind of try and link with what is happening in the building, so to speak, on site, and in some of the ways that Hannah suggested, with asking questions through the sermon, inviting questions, possibly even, as I know a number of you have done, of having an opportunity for online questions to be addressed live on site, so that the online pastor will pass them on to the preacher or whoever's leading the worship, and then those questions can be addressed. So it makes for an interaction that normally wouldn't happen after a sermon or a talk. I'm keen that we get some other questions in. Patrick Kimber, please unmute and ask away.
Thank you very much. So we're a small church in a small community, and we kind of know everybody when you walk down the street. And it's just, I was thinking about if you do like a 3 or 5 minute podcasty kind of thing on YouTube, perhaps once a week, would be a nice idea, but I have no idea what to talk about. Any ideas?
Well, talk about what you know is always a good place to start. So, you know, what are things that maybe you're asked frequently about church life? So one thing I constantly want to do, but I just haven't had the time right now, is kind of Christianese explain. So actually, what are the weird and wonderful words that we use as Christians and we could use in this room? And you'd all understand the words that I'm saying, but if I said it to my friends who aren't Christians, they'd have no clue. Actually, could you kind of like unpack certain words, or you know, why we say it like this, which is a great way of kind of educating. Sounds very kind of condescending slightly, but that's not the word. But you know, actually you're helping them to understand certain things. You know, if you're only doing it for like 5-10 minutes, you know, talk about what you're doing. Are there any kind of like, could you have a, you know, talk about favorite Bible verses, or you know, worship songs that you're particularly loving? What does that mean to you? Actually, you know, if you did it something even as a quick video, you could also put that up on YouTube and have that as kind of like there's YouTube shorts at the moment going, but also the short form content is great to kind of intersperse throughout the week. You can put that up on Facebook as well. People are more likely to kind of watch sort of shorter little videos. You know, there's if you video something, actually you can just pull out the audio and then put that onto as podcasts. But it's always worth kind of starting off. Better to take away something such as the visual rather than only do audio and then actually you're missing out on something. But just talk about what you know. What are you particularly passionate about? If you've got any certain hobbies that you can relate into faith, or not do it about faith at all, just about life.
Brilliant, thank you, Hannah. And Patrick, given that I know you, you know a lot of people in your community and a lot of the issues that exercise the people in your community. And so some of those social issues would make an excellent subject for a podcast, particularly interview style, with others in the community who might be able to speak to them, and you as a church almost being a catalyst for community change. And the podcast will then hopefully engage with people that aren't of faith as much as those that are. Ken, thank you so much for your patience in waiting. Would you like to come off mute and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Mine's more of I guess a slightly more technical question. I guess like a lot of churches, we've experimented with various forms of worship and meetings on Zoom. Our services over the last year have been pre-recorded and broadcast on YouTube. We're now transitioning back to live worship in the church and actually starting to adopt different styles of worship on a Sunday morning, and perhaps 2 or 3 different shorter services during the course of Sunday morning worship, all of which will be live streamed to YouTube. The question actually is more around that. It's a slightly thorny issue of copyright. And I'd just be interested, Hannah, or indeed if any of you here have any specific advice or guidance about, unwittingly, taking content from the internet and broadcasting it out on YouTube, if there's any particular advice or guidance you might offer on that point. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh gosh. I think to start with, make sure that you've got all the appropriate licenses. I can't think of them all off the top of my head, but in that you have the license to broadcast. So I think at the beginning of lockdown, it was just sort of the license to play, but it wasn't to broadcast. I think now it's the general one is to broadcast as well. I think, as far as I understand, and Jonathan said he can help with copyright, so that's brilliant. But I think, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, like if you're playing it, that's like your interpretation of the song, so like there is a bit more flexibility with that. It is if you are literally going, right, now we're going to listen to a video by Hillsong, and if they, you know, and you're literally just taking a YouTube video and putting it into your service, that is not allowed.
Yeah, that's to be understood.
However, I mean, we so Rend Collective approved, like they gave copyright allowance for, or they released the copyright of being able to use, they did some kind of lockdown videos, and we put that up on was it Facebook or YouTube on the Sunday services, and it's still, the platform still flagged it. I'm not quite sure why, but it's a kind of a flag rather than a strike. So we like, and that just affects us monetizing, but we were nowhere, we're not wanting to monetize or can monetize the YouTube channel at the moment. So for me, I was like, it didn't really matter. But even though we had the approval to use the song, the platform didn't like it. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one because it's so often done kind of by AI and not by manually by people.
That's right.
But speak to Jonathan, I think is going to be the best thing.
Your experience is the same as ours, but thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Jonathan, do you have anything different to add? Just if you wanted to.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit because I looked into this quite a lot when we started recording the services. We don't really have musicians that can play songs for us. If you have, you still need a streaming license to do that, which you can get from CCLI. It's not very expensive. As we don't have musicians, we use software from iSing Worship, which is an iPad app. It's available for Mac, for PC, and they have pre-recorded songs. It's very versatile. You can add verses and choruses and all sorts of things. But they have actually said that they are releasing the copyright for that. If you have the CCLI streaming license, it will get flagged on YouTube as copyright infringement, but they have said, you know, they have no interest in pursuing that at all. In terms of using other stuff, I have on occasion used other things that are not from iSing Worship. And again, they do get flagged, but I think the concern is if you are monetizing, trying to monetize your videos, then they would pursue it. If you're not monetizing it, then they just tend to ignore it. And, you know, virtually every video we have done for the last 16 months has been flagged as a copyright issue, and it's never been a concern.
That's great. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And now please put some of those links in the chat box, Jonathan. That'd be really helpful for people. There's a few people there putting links in. There's a whole load of sung worship, prayers, sermons, communions, a whole load of online service resources that we produced over lockdown. You can access them all free of charge there. If you fancy giving a little donation, then that will help us to produce other resources in the future. But you can click on that link and check out some of those resources maybe afterwards. And there's information on that page as well about CCLI streaming licenses and the different licenses you need for different platforms. And there is different licenses for different platforms that you require. So Mike, you were going to make a comment, ask a question, and then I think you put it in the box. If you feel free to come off mute and to make that point if you'd like to. I think you're wanting to say we just need to be aware that it's okay to make mistakes and show that we're human when we're streaming. To which I think all God's people said amen. And I feel very much that is the case.
I didn't actually put that down in the, I had that in my notes because I normally do finish with that saying, do give yourself like grace to make mistakes, and that is absolutely fine. And I think the authenticity of the occasional kind of, you know, little thing that might happen or big thing, you know, at the end of the day, your heart's in the right place and you're doing something, it's not the end of the world.
Mike, come off mute, please do.
Sorry, my question was basically, have you thought about, or have you produced a little A4 or A5 text sheet for those churches that want to look at going online and streaming, haven't already, and need to know what equipment they need just to produce it, just to get it out there? Like I said earlier, making mistakes is fine. It makes us human. It makes us, interact, and people from outside church don't feel like they can communicate to us or connect with us. So have you thought about producing a little cheat sheet, as we would call it, on how to set up online?
I did a while back. I was going to do one because with various people I get to work with, was going to do, so it's sort of like, here's a super basic, relatively free, all you need is kind of Wi-Fi and a phone. Here's kind of starting to get a bit more serious, and here's the kind of tech dream of equipment and stuff like that, and sort of how to go between it. And I kind of felt a little bit that kind of most people were fairly happy with, although they, if they were doing live streaming or they were going to do it, that they'd have already started. But if that's something that people would find useful, it's definitely something that I can start pulling together if people want it.
That's fantastic, guys. I think we're kind of coming into land, and so what I'm going to do is just bring things to a close, and I'd like to pray for you just before we head off. But we'll stick around for a couple of minutes. We can't stick around more than about 10 tonight, but we will stick around for a couple of minutes once we've prayed, if there are others that want questions or comments answered and you've not had the opportunity. Thanks for the various bits of information that have been in the chat box. To say, some of you are wondering about the chat. Yes, I will save the chat and I'll put it as a link in the description box on the YouTube video. So if you go to our YouTube channel, see this video by the end of the weekend, look in the description box under the video, and I'll put a link so you'll be able to download all of the chat. Just to say that some of you will be able to do that already. If you look on your chat box in the corner where you would write your chat, then you will see a little box with 3 dots. And if you click on that box, then most of you will have the option to save chat, which will save it natively to your computer, the gadget that you are on tonight. So if you've got that option, the little square with the 3 dots, you click on it and then click save chat. It will save all of the chat to your computer. Can I just, as we come into close, say that it's been great to be together tonight and to share together in this way. Thank you for those that have contributed, and I hope it's been helpful. We've got another webinar coming up on the 15th of July, which I'm really excited by. This is a resource that's been put together by Charlie Clayton, who's previously from 24/7 Prayer in Ibiza and now is a pioneer in Mevagissey in Cornwall. Some people get all the good gigs, don't they? So he's put together a resource that is a free resource that he'd just like for churches to know about, to be a catalyst in their communities, to help their communities stop and breathe and reflect and process the last 12 months before they rush on to whatever the new normal is supposed to be. I think that a lot of people want to reconstruct life or get back to things, there's been profound damage that's been done to most of us in the last 12 months. And to be able to stop, reflect, and for the church to be there and for God to be present in that process of healing people before we rush back, I think is a huge missional opportunity for us as the Christian church. So if you're interested, then the details are there. Click on the book when link, as you did, most of you, for this, and it will give you more details and a booking code for you to come along to that one on the 15th of July. And to say again, there is our YouTube channel, so click on that. Please don't rush off once I've prayed. Do stick around, look back at the chat box, click on some links before you log off. If you want to ask some questions, we'll be around for the next few minutes. But let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you that, as Hannah said, although times have changed and the way we've communicated the gospel, your message, has constantly changed over the history of your church, Lord, that the message of hope that we bring has stayed the same for all time. Jesus, hope to be found in you, transformation for us, not just as individuals, but for the communities that you've called us to serve. We so passionately believe that to be the case today, as it has always been. Lord, as we consider communities maybe in a new way with an online presence, as we consider relationship building and belonging differently than we ever have before. Father, I thank you that this period in our history has not crept up on you and surprised you. Lord, that before the beginnings of time, you knew that this would be the world that we would live in. And equally, you called us to serve you and the people of this world at this junction, in full knowledge that we would be facing the challenges that we presently do. So Lord, even if tonight we don't feel we've got all the answers, see us as willing to be led by you, and Lord, to be continuing this journey together as your community. Lord, to find out what it means to use all methods and all means to create that sense of community that only you can bring, and Lord, to see lives and communities transformed across this your world in the power of your Spirit for your name's sake. Your blessing upon my brothers and sisters tonight. May they know all goodness in their lives. Amen.